An important issue in induction and reasoning in general is the validity of the evidence of the senses. I think if we look at experience and the facts, it's clear that they are valid and reliable. The only time we get into problems or worry about it is when people make stuff up, or when we find we can't explain something. But you got to be really careful about knowing when something is merely something you can't explain versus something that supposedly shows the evidence of the senses are not valid. It's a mistake a lot of people make, as I used to. Thankfully, through some study of some good philosophy and drawing conclusions from what scientists actually do and fundamentally putting that in terms of my own experience, I see that, yeah, there's no problem with the evidence of the senses. Some ways some people explain things make it clear. So we got to remember perception is a means of awareness, and we got to not get carried away with all this like rationalistic philosophy developed from thousands of years of people not understanding a reason, logic, induction. You know, we got to distinguish between mistakes people made or misunderstandings they had, what they were doing in ignorance. You know, they were jumping to conclusions about certain things instead of saying, hey, we don't know everything. We know senses are reliable. There's these things we're not sure about. We'll have to wait until we can explain that, or people in the future understand it, but right now we don't. People would try to say, well, there's optical illusions. They'd throw their hands up in the air, yell, scream, fall down on the floor, curl up in a ball, soil their pants and cry, and think that, oh, we can't know anything. You know, we got to be smarter than that. We build bridges, we go to the moon, we educate people, we talk to friends. Other people are not figments of our imagination. We make ourselves healthy, we make other people healthy, we cure diseases. We do a lot of things that show that we can deal with the world validly, and we get that information from the evidence of the senses and experience. It's legitimate. We need to grasp that perception is a faculty or function of a living organism. We got to really put it in that context to understand it better. You can excuse some of the ancients because we had a lot of thinking to do before we could figure some of this out. Figuring out, you know, coming up with the concept of consciousness, of mind, of reason, of logic, of induction. It took a long time, and it's taken a long time to understand it. And you got to grasp we still have a lot more to do, a lot more to learn. You know, human beings in general. We're not going to learn it all in our lifetimes, so we just need to, you know, like a lot of other things, just deal with it. We know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. Big deal. So remember that perception is a function of a living organism, and it's our means of awareness. It, you know, the role of consciousness is to allow an organism, an animal, to move through its environment, to act, to find nutrition and things its life depends on, to avoid, help avoid danger. Remember, it's, you know, and you got to think like everything else, it's finite and limited. So it has a certain role, that and nothing else. It is finite and limited. It's the function of an organism to be aware of its environment and the world. So you got to grasp that certain things like some optical illusions on 2 dimensions, you know, that's those are artifacts of perception. Perception is meant to move through a three-dimensional environment, not to identify two-dimensional things. So movement is inherent in consciousness. There's that feedback. We perceive as we move. It's a thing through time, not a two-dimensional thing in at a point in time. Perception is through time and through an environment. That's a critical thing to see. Or, for example, we got to grasp that it's finite and limited. So, for example, if you see that there's some optical illusion that's two-dimensional and we can't see all 12 dots in this thing, it doesn't mean that perception edits. That's an improper conclusion. That's not what's going on. It means that that's a two-dimensional thing, not three-dimensional, and it's not based on moving through our environment in time in two dimensions. And it also is not like saying that somehow invalidates perception or makes it a flaw, is trying to impose your own views on perception. Perception is the means of an organism to move through its environment according to its environment and what its needs are. So to try to say that we should look at this thing and see all 12 dots is to try to deny the nature of our particular means of awareness, our perception. We've got to look at the kind of animal we are, how we move through environment, what we need to do, and that will give us, some important clues about how our perception should work. We got to recognize that, hey, maybe we can't explain this exactly. There's this thing I don't understand. We've got to take time to think about perception, what it is, what its nature is, how it pertains to a particular organism, how it relates to movement and achieving action. We can't just say that we don't automatically see all of reality and identify everything the way we want or we think perception should work. Therefore, perception is invalid. Remember, look at the nature of things. The world comes first. What's out there, not what's in our heads, our wants and our wishes. We need to be, we need to be Aristotelian, look for cause-effect relationships, and not try to look at perception in a Kantian or Kuhnian fashion, just making things up, or in some Platonic fashion, making stuff up our head and turning away from the world. We need to see that we got to go through a hard process of reasoning and using logic, and be scientific about perception itself. Look at things inductively, integrate perception with other things we know, do the hard work, and try to refrain from jumping to conclusions before we've done that. We often find that so-called flaws or paradoxes in something turn out to be flaws or paradoxes in our own head, not in the nature of things. So, thinking through some of those examples, we see that we've got to look at perception not based on isolated optical illusions, but in a broader context. So, take another one where there's movement involved. Besides some optical illusions or this 12 dot thing that you can see probably on the internet somewhere. It's a bunch of gray lines and there's 12 black dots in it. You can't all see them all because you've got to focus on one thing. You've got vision all around, but it's not sharp, and then you can focus on just a few things. That's part of being an animal, and for us specifically being a predator. Or if you look at some illusions such as seeming to see water where there's merely refraction, that's not something that shows perception valid. It's something that shows, again, the nature of our perceptual mechanism and how it acts and interacts specifically with refracted light. You know, if we didn't have that kind of illusion, things like that, we wouldn't be able to know, you know, that there is refraction. That is evidence for refraction, and it tells us about the nature of light. Same thing with light bending in water. You know, a fish isn't going to be exactly where it might appear to be because light is bent. You know, that's showing the cause-effect relationships of light going through water, through air, through our eyes. You know, we perceive through cause-effect mechanisms. We can't take perception and detach it from causation and make it some kind of platonic, otherworldly thing that is supernatural. You know, it's natural, it's part of this world. Perception is just part of a whole cause-effect chain. You know, we have to have cause-effect chains to know about the way the world works and what things are and what their nature is. You know, it's a whole cause-effect interaction between us and other things, or between a bird and other things, or a dolphin and other things. Each type of animal has its own specific means of perceptions, so you know, that it uses to move through the world and achieve its values. And then, of course, even within that, sometimes, you know, there's obviously variations among people, different abilities to hear, to see, different haptic abilities, just as there's different strengths, different heights, different hair colors, different hair lengths, different brain sizes and everything. And, you know, so some people maybe are colorblind or can't see at all. So, you know, that's just about how their perceptual organism is, you know, their perceptual mechanism is, and that's what allows them to work in the world and through it. Hope this gives you a little better idea of the validity of the evidence of the senses. Remember, it's a cause-effect mechanism. It's part of the natural world. It's part of the chain of causation of things interacting. It's not separate from it. So we need to do some hard work, as I've had to do. Thankfully, learning from, like, you know, how great scientists do things, and reading some good philosophy, and thinking about my own experience. I still have a lot of work to do, I'm sure. There's a lot, you know, we just don't know about perception and consciousness yet, you know, human beings. But we just got to remember this part of the natural world and the chain of causation, and remember that perception is a function of living, of animals, that allows us to move through our environment and achieve values, to take action. It's specific to certain types of organisms, and it's finite and limited. You know, it can't do anything. It has a nature, it is what it is, so it's going to interact with other things in the world accordingly. Hope this helps. If you have any questions or comments, let me know, and hope you have a good day.